Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Off My Bridge. My name is Guy and we are looking at our fourth adventure in our Borg Campaign series. And if you haven't watched episode 1, 2, and 3 where we are planning this Borg campaign, that's okay, as a matter of fact, because this is a fourth adventure. So we've had 2 adventures that relate to the Borg problem, and now we're on to our fourth adventure, which has nothing to do with that main problem, or at least so it would seem, until the very end. So, because this is a silly adventure, we're creating a silly adventure. We've done interstitial adventures, so I thought I'd give you a silly adventure example. That's what this adventure is going to be. And when I started to design it, I sat down and I said, okay, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? And for Dungeons and Dragons in a Castle, which is a major Hasbro live gaming experience event that takes place in the UK 3 times a year, I will be running a game that involves pirates, at least some ships anyway. And so I thought, you know what? Let's do it. Let's turn the crew of my PC's ship into pirates. Arr. And so that is exactly what we're going to be doing. Now, how are we going to do it? That is oftentimes the big challenge when trying to create silly adventures, is how are we going to transform a starship crew in 2375 or thereabouts into pirates? I thought long and hard about this. I had a couple of options. There was the whole alien interrogation thing. There was the holodeck misadventure thing. There was an alternate universe thing. And looking at it all, I thought, you know what? Holodecks are quite a fascinating thing, and they can be used for a lot of different things as well in terms of storing the data of crewmen in the pattern buffers. And then I also thought about it going, well, the room is only a couple of meters by a couple of meters in size. How is it possible that, say, for example, you can get on a horse and ride miles and miles and miles within a holodeck? How does that actually work? It's not like the horses on a treadmill. The horse is holographic, so it running, you are not actually moving. The whole world is moving around you. That kind of makes sense, but at the same time, if you've got multiple people in the holodeck, how on earth does that work? Anyway, I don't want to try and solve the technical problems of the show, nor do I want to point problems out of the technology within the show. I want to utilize that. I want to capitalize on that. And so I came up with this idea. In Act 1, our heroes are given the opportunity to go on some shore leave, take some R&R. And I would encourage you to do this anyway, even if you're not doing a silly episode. Just send them on some shore leave, and you can encourage them and say, well, you've been given access to Risa or to any one of the holiday planets. What's your character doing? Are you going surfing? Are you pairing up with somebody else? Are you going solo? Are you going reading? Are you just staying on the ship trying to catch up with work? Anyway, whatever it might be, encourage the PCs to describe what they're planning on doing on their holiday. Really get into it and deep dive. Ask them to describe what foods they're looking forward to and what clothing are they packing. Make them kind of go, what exactly is going on in this episode? As soon as they're about to depart, a certain ensign, in this case, I gave them the name of Stakadich, Ensign Stakadich, approaches the crew, the PCs, and says, whilst that they are on shore leave, Ensign Stakadich wants to try out a new technique in the holodeck, whereby instead of the holodeck moving around the character will move around using micro-transportation technology. The transporter will simply move the character within the holodeck rather than moving the holodeck. The advantage of this is that multiple characters could be in the holodeck and could ride in different directions, and all 3 or all 4 of them would have different experiences because they would be teleported forward rather than actually running out of space. It's a little bit convoluted, and I'm sure I can word it better, but a translocational transporter within the holodeck is what this ensign is trying to do. Since most of the crew will be away, there's no real reason to deny it, and everybody else is going on shore leave, so what harm could there be? There is a power dip for 0.043 seconds. There's a little dip in power, and everybody notices it. And then the ship goes to red alert, except the red alert bell sounds like a banging brass bell. The transporter room starts to warp and turn into wood. The console turns into a wooden railing, the lights turn into flickering lanterns, and suddenly the crew find themselves no longer in the transporter, but now they find themselves in the hold of a ship. and the bell ringing is ringing frantically. They run up onto deck, discovering that they are on a small sloop, and the sloop is being attacked by a pirate ship. It fires cannons at the ship, and the first cannonball comes sailing through, smashes into the deck. The crew take stress damage to realize that the holodeck safeties are off, although they don't know that they're on a holodeck at this moment in time. Anyway, they take some stress damage, and the cannonball that arrives has a note which says, "Surrender, or Dread Pirate West will take you." It's at this point that Ensign Stakidich comes rushing up onto deck saying, "I think I've made a mistake. I'm not entirely sure, but I think we're all stuck inside the holodeck, because I may have transported everybody at the same time into the holodeck. I tried to do something." The PCs can make some various checks and things and discover that, in fact, what the ensign did in an attempt, a desperate attempt, to be able to move everybody around within the holodeck, they accidentally transported most of the crew into the holodeck and into this inter-holodeck transporter device thing. They're now stuck, not in the holodeck, but, and this is what they'll realize after doing an extended task, they're actually all inside a buffer inside a transporter, which is now running the holodeck. Because the computer, in order to fulfill his simulation, realized that why should I transport a whole bunch of people every few seconds around the holodeck? If everybody's just in the transporter buffer, they won't even notice that they're being transported, and I can just run the whole thing inside the transporter buffer. So the crew are actually stuck in the transport buffer, which is now also a holodeck. So that's a problem. How do they get out? Well, they can't end the program because the program thinks of them all as holo creations. Not a single one of them is actual physical entity. And so the bioscanners are not picking up that there's anyone in the holodeck, because there isn't. They're all in the pattern buffer in a virtual holodeck. Our crew have no choice but to try and finish the adventure. So they turn to Ensign Stakidich and say, "Well, how do we finish the adventure? What do we have to do? Do we have to defeat this Dread Pirate West?" And Ensign Stakidich goes, "Well, yes, but the transporter buffers can't maintain the whole crew, so I think we're going to be cycling," and then the ensign disappears. And half of the PCs disappear as well. They now have to make SPCs. And the reason is that the transporter buffer can't actually hold so many active patterns as to contain most of the crew. So what it's doing is it's cycling crew in and out of the pattern buffer, materializing them onto the holodeck in a form of stasis so that they don't recognize the passage of time, and then coming back to the, bringing them back to the buffer as it needs to cycle out patterns as they start to degrade. It's an ingenious loop of keeping the signal from degrading, but at the same time keeping everyone active within the holodeck. Or at least as much as humanly possible. Or in this case, computerly possible, I guess you could say. Our PCs now move into discovering what the hell is going to happen. Their ship gets sunk by the Dread Pirate West, or they can surrender to the Dread Pirate West, it doesn't matter. Either way, he maroons them on an island. But they see a flag in the distance, and they discover that there is another ship approaching called the George White, and it is captained by a regular bunch of sailors and marines who are hunting the Dread Pirate West, and will basically take the PCs on board and treat them as perhaps scouts, although there will be some suspicion that perhaps they're working for Dread Pirate West, and that the captain of the George White should be cautious. Nonetheless, our crew discover that the Dread Pirate West has a hideout on an island called Cutthroat Island. Yes, I know. And it is a silly adventure after all. Anyway, they can't approach by sea because the Dread Pirate has got a lot of cannons and things pointing out from his base, covering the cove that would be the approach from the sea. So they need to approach from the jungle, but the jungle is full of weird and wonderful beasts. And so they need to travel to a pirate island where in Botany Bay, and it had to be called that, they discover, by hopefully going around and talking to local pirates, that the beasts that hide within the jungle, that protect Dread Pirate West's camp, are afraid of flashing lights. This should be enough for them to be able to get onto the island, to trek through the jungle with an extended task, survive all kinds of manner of horrific beasts by flashing lights at them or by passing the skill challenges in the extended task. And every time they fail, of course, they're taking stress damage, and eventually arrive at the Dread Pirates camp. This will bring us to the end of Act 2, which means that we need to have a twist. The twist is that Dread Pirate West fires a beam of energy from his lookout tower into the sky, which causes the sky to start digitally decompiling. The crew quickly realize that the Dread Pirate West and all of his cronies are in actual fact other crew members from their ship. And so if they go around killing them, they're literally erasing their own crew members from the holo buffer, which unfortunately would also erase their patterns from the transporter buffer, and actually they'd be killing their own crewmen. So they need to convince Dread Pirate West that they are friendly, and that maybe this whole idea of Dread Pirate West of destabilizing the holodeck and the transporter buffer is not a good idea. Because if the holodeck shuts down, it purges the memory buffers of all of the signals that are in the memory buffers, including the entire crew of the ship. So the stakes are now incredibly high. The only problem is Dread Pirate West set this device going using found technology from around. So it's brass and heavy glass lamps and whatever they could find, plus some static electricity generated from a bicycle that was quickly built and invented. All that kind of wonderful, wonderful, crazy stuff. They managed to turn it off, but now they have to repair the damage that they did so that they can finish the holodeck. This takes a little bit of engineering, and just as they are done, theoretically they have defeated the Dread Pirate West when the George White, not trusting the PCs from the very beginning, sails into the cove guns blazing because they think that the PCs have now joined with Dread Pirate West. Of course, the George White is heavily armed, and the fort that the PCs are in needs to be defended. And so now we have a good old-fashioned pirate battle with the PCs hopefully manning antiquated cannons, firing them at the George White, or trying to convince the George White that all is good and everyone has surrendered and life is grand. At which point, of course, the moment they do that, they defeat the George White either linguistically or militaristically, doesn't matter. The holodeck ends and everyone is transported back to where they are. And before they can berate Ensign Stukidich for doing what he does, the PCs are transported onto the holiday island, where they are greeted by a pirate festival. Of course, it would be a pirate parade on the Paradise planet that they have just beamed down to. Whew, that's a tongue twister. And that is the end of the adventure. Give them some quest upgrades, give them some rewards for having done it all, and then have the captain receive a communication. And that communication I will read out to you. Captain, says an unknown shady figure. The image from the view screen is purposefully blanked out. We've just learned that the Orions have a changeling prisoner. I'm not sure how they did it. They're offering to sell him to the highest bidder. Starfleet doesn't buy slaves, but the changeling matches a biosignature that you got from the Hadda 3 incident. That's the Romulan incident from the previous adventure. That can't be a coincidence. If you want to resolve whatever has been going on, you'll be at that slave auction. It's in 7 days in the Altarius Nebula. I'm sending the coordinates now. And that is how you end your silly adventure, by linking into the next adventure, which is most definitely not silly. That is the end of Borg Adventure number 4, which means we're on to Borg Adventure number 5. That will be next month. And of course, all patrons will get a copy of this Borg Adventure. So look out for that at the end of the month. Anyway, until we meet again next week, where we are talking about how to play a Ferengi. Because Ferengi are more than just profit. No, I lied. They're just profit. See you next week. And remember, it's going to cost you 5 slips of latinum.